those next days of getting back into my room and recovering and just being so grateful to be alive, that Theo was alive. There was this point of like us, not knowing, and I just remember like hearing his heartbeat and that he was okay. Like it was just the best thing in the world. I was just utterly grateful.
Welcome to the Happy Home Birth Podcast, your source for positive natural childbirth stories and your community of support, education, and encouragement in all things home birth and motherhood. A shocking medical diagnosis is never easy to grapple with, but what happens when it comes in the middle of your pregnancy? Hey there, happy home birthers, and welcome to episode 277 of the Happy Home Birth Podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Fusco, and this week we're speaking to Chloe, a wife and mother to two precious little boys. Chloe's story will have you on the edge of your seat, but it will also instill a level of beauty beyond my ability to express in this little introduction. So let's waste no time and jump right in. Please remember that the opinions of my guests may not necessarily reflect my own and vice versa. And the show is not medical advice, it's an educational tool. So continue to take empowered responsibility for your health and your family. Chloe, I am honored to have you on the Happy Home Birth Podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited. Would you mind taking just a moment to introduce yourself and your family to the listeners?
Yes, sounds good. So I'm Chloe. My husband's name is Brandon, and we have a 3-year-old son, James, and a 6-month-old baby, Theo. My husband and I are born and raised in California and then moved out here to South Carolina a couple of years ago. And we're just working and living life.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, I am really excited to jump into your birth stories. We've got some really intense stuff to cover, but it's all so, I don't know, the way that I've heard you discuss everything, it turns something that seems hard into something beautiful, and I'm really excited for the listeners to hear that. So, would you mind just starting us off back at the beginning? You are becoming pregnant for the first time. How are you feeling about that?
Yes. So I was terrified of pregnancy before becoming pregnant. It was this scary unknown to me, and just like birth, I couldn't even imagine it. I skipped the birth video in health class on my freshman year, so I had no concept of what birth even was. And then on becoming pregnant, I got pregnant my first, like after our first year of marriage, and it was very unexpected. And I like went through this process of shock and grieving. Like we thought we were going to wait a few years, and it was just like not the expectation of entering into motherhood that I thought. And basically my whole first trimester, I just kind of avoided the fact that I was pregnant. I read a lot of fiction books and kind of was just in this other world almost, it seems like. So that was my initial on being pregnant.
Wow. And then how did that progress through that pregnancy and into that labor?
So I had a huge turning point around the second trimester. I was listening to Lisa's birth story from Farmhouse on Boone. I love her. I know you've had her on. And I had never heard anything like that before. Like I had no concept of home birth or natural birth or any of these things. And she mentioned like natural childbirth, the Bradley method. And so I dove headlong into that and into your podcast. I was working from home at the time and just like ate it up basically all day. And so really educated myself about birth, and like the natural birth podcast, your podcast helped me so much of seeing what birth was and what it could be like and what was normal and how beautiful the experience could be. And so I kind of started opening myself up to that piece by piece and was doing OB care at the time. And we had this huge struggle where like that was completely covered for me to be at the hospital. But I was starting to feel so much more comfortable with the idea of being with under midwifery care. And so throughout that process, my husband and I were taking a Bradley method class, and it's not for everybody, but we liked how intense it was and how long in that aspect of working together, and eventually switched over to midwifery. I think I was pretty late into pregnancy, like 26, 28 weeks, and it was the best decision ever. It was so worth it that I loved the care I was receiving.
Wow. So you switched over to midwifery care. Was the plan to give birth at home in a birth center or still at the hospital just under midwives?
Yeah, this was a freestanding birth center, and they had the option of home birth too. Just at the time, I was more comfortable with doing the birth center.
Right. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay, so let's hear, how did that unfold? How did that labor itself actually unfold?
Yeah, so I woke up. No, I didn't wake up. I went to bed, laid my head on the pillow, and felt the first contraction. I'd been having a lot of Braxton Hicks, and that was different. And I thought, oh no, like from everything I've been hearing on the podcast and all this, like I need to get my rest. I need to get to sleep. And so I tried and tried, and eventually just gave up, woke up, was so hungry, got up, had a bunch of eggs and a bunch of toast, which I'm glad that I did because I had no appetite hardly the rest of the time. I was just doing like smoothies and stuff like that. But did wind up being able to get some sleep, woke up early. I was in like labor land. So I turned off my husband's alarm to let him sleep in, even though he was supposed to be going to work. I don't know why. So he woke up in this rush, like, oh, I need to get to work. And I had been laboring by myself for a little bit and like was really helping me having the image of like waves just rolling over and imagining that in my mind over and over again as the contractions would come. And I told him, like, no, it's okay. You don't have to go to work. I think we're having a baby today. And then we kind of just jumped headlong soon after he woke up. I started having back labor and was needing some assistance. And it was really great preparation that we took that course. And like we had so many different ideas for positions and things that we had practiced where Brandon was giving me counter pressure. And so we kind of just plugged along all day, laboring like that in our apartment, just switching positions. Like I said, I didn't really have an appetite. I would come in randomly when a contraction was happening and ask Brandon to be like, pray for me that I don't throw up, because that was a real thing many times. And, you know, like I said, with all my preparation, I really wanted to keep my food down, my nourishment. And it kind of felt like towards the end of the day that we were going to be in it for the long haul. I also saw the chiropractor in labor. I was thinking of you, and that I know you also did that in your first pregnancy. And I was thinking like something hopefully will help this back labor, and it still continued. I love the midwifery care that I was receiving, and I don't recall if they told me like, hey, you should do the mile circuit, or like I don't think they said you should do it. They might have suggested it, but to me I it would have been helpful if there was that strong suggestion like, hey, I think you need to do the mile circuit right now, because that helped me, I think, in my second labor experience. And so yeah, this labor was 30 hours in total,
Whew.
and it was a long haul of very intense back labor, and Brandon was helping me so much. I'm sure he was so exhausted with all of the counter pressure that he was doing. And we had prepared, and it was honestly such a beautiful time, even though it was so long and so intense. We had scripture that he was reading me, the Christian hypnobirthing app, which I hardly looked into at all while I was pregnant. I thought, oh, like, what is that? It ended up being so helpful. I had it on for hours and stuff, and it really helped me just get into that zone where I would describe that labor as peace, like peaceful, even though it was so intense. Like Brandon and I were so connected. I so appreciated him being there, and it was just the two of us doing this. Um, and yeah, he would read scripture over me. He was so in tune with what I needed of getting me water or a towel or saying, hey, I think we should do this, or lying down, or you should get up to use the bathroom. Like I felt so supported and so connected, and was starting to get a little bit discouraged though as the day was closing, and I had already been laboring all night and now all that day. And then there was a point that I like found side lying really helpful, and you know, where my back was exposed and Brandon would give me counter pressure on my side like that of being like, I think that it's time, like I really need some support. Like we had been in contact with the midwives a little bit, and it was mostly like just light contact of like, okay, let us know and stuff like that. And so we finally called them, and they like listened to me, I think, have a contraction, and suggested like, I think maybe if you hold on a little bit longer. And I was so discouraged by that because it really felt like, wait, but this is so intense, like you mean that it's going to get more intense? And then finally, like I think it was hours later, felt like, okay, it's time. Like it was a deep knowing then. And yeah, then we went and got in the car, drove to the birth center, and still like it, car contractions are not fun at all. And this point had the Christian hypnobirthing app on of like the scripture and the relaxation music. And I just felt like this deep dwelling in God's presence of Him being with me and over the whole thing, and like peace, like I said. And I just felt so like it felt like a big hug when we got to the birth center. It was a team of four midwives, and you didn't know who was going to be at the birth. And it was our both of my husband and our favorite midwife that we had been seeing. And that just felt like such a huge gift that she was going to be the one attending our birth. And like the way that she like grabbed me and was speaking so gently and like just kindly and full of love, like leading me into the birth center. And Brandon got all my pillows set up to do our whole thing that we've been doing at home, and stuff. And just I like that whole memory of being there at the birth center just feels like a big warm hug.
Oh, that's beautiful, Chloe. That is what I wish on everyone to experience, that sense of just, even in the intensity, that sense of peace and that sense of you are not alone in this, that you are so loved and cherished, and just, oh, the comfort that you're describing, like the feeling of just a blanket around your shoulders, like, oh, how gorgeous.
it it was so cozy, and I just kept repeating like, thank you God, thank you
Oh.
God, and knowing that He was with me, and like being like, yes, I can do this. Like I was just in this like deep sense that I've never experienced before of just like gratitude and resting, and like Him giving me the strength, and just being fully open to receiving the support of the people around me. Yeah, it was beautiful. So they suggested that I get in the tub, and that like being on my back just made the back labor more intense, and I think like sped up the pressure of me feeling like I needed to push. So that wasn't working for a bit, and they kind of just let me do my thing. There was a midwife assistant there, and I just remember her like gently rocking in the rocking chair, just like feeling like this presence of like she was just there. And we got it, and then we were at the birth center for 4 hours before James was born. So it went pretty fast from that point, like a couple hours of laboring, like in all of that coziness and support, like I mentioned, and then a couple hours of pushing.
Wow. And then what position did you end up being in when you gave birth?
I wound up being in a birth stool. I was on my side, like as things were really progressing in the pushing phase, and I had this tiny like thought in the back of my head of like, no, I think that push like puts more pressure on whatever side, like when they're coming out. Just I don't even know where I heard that from everything I was doing. So I like quickly was like, wait, I want to switch, and had been doing the birth stool previously. And we originally had intentions that Brandon was going to catch the baby, but like in the moment with like I was very vocal at that point. Brandon has repeated it back to me what it sounded like a couple of times, and it's very funny.
Don't you love that? That was one of the big things. Thomas talks about this all the time. We were re-listening to the audio of my first birth, because the video you can't even see. It's like super dark, but you can just hear me actually after I gave birth to Janie, and I did sound like a bottlenose dolphin. Like, correct. He did determine that and did tell me that, which was the incorrect thing to do, within that first year postpartum.
Yes, not a very tactful comment.
So we laugh about that now. That's one of like our favorite memories that was not very funny at the time, but now it's become like,
For
okay,
sure.
you right, you right.
Yep. We're at that point now that it's funny. He'll hear a sound and be like, "Oh, that sound. I know what that sounds like." Like, oh, great, thanks. Anyway, there making those sounds, Brandon in the moment being like, I don't really feel like I want to catch this baby. But it worked out fine because I was on the birth stool and I was really leaning on him for support just that whole time. And he was at my shoulder, like talking to me and just being there. And the midwife was down there. I remember her saying, like, okay, like you're going to catch this baby, right? And we were both kind of like, eh. And
Don't move.
so, yeah. Yep. And so, James came out over on the birth stool, and I just like there's a picture of me in that moment of just like the elation of meeting him. And the first thing I said was, I did it. And then I was holding him and I was like, you did it. It was so sweet. And my first thought of saying this was, he's so cute. Like, I just didn't expect her. Like, I just had one of those experiences of instantly falling in love with him and just being like enraptured in how beautiful he was. Also, in like all of the, everything happening at I had those thoughts after I turned him over because when I first met him, I was holding him and the way that he was passed to me, like he was facing down. And so I like didn't see him for a bit. I needed to be prompted of like, you can pick him up and rub his back. And that just didn't come natural in the moment.
That's fair. I think that's very
Yep.
fair. I think you're a little overwhelmed.
Yes. Yeah. 30 hours later.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay, so beautiful first birth, long, but still these, pillars that you look back on are peacefulness and coziness and this strength that you found in yourself, in the people surrounding you and the Lord. What was what was it like becoming pregnant for the second time? How did that unfold?
Yeah, so James was about to turn 2, and Brandon and I started feeling like that nudge where we wanted to add to our family. So he was sort of like Theo was a trying, not trying baby that came about. And I was so excited to be pregnant again. We had just moved into our house a few months before, and we were on land, and I had all of these pictures of like having a cozy little baby and us working on all of these things that we wanted to do to our property. And I knew since we were in a home and were more settled and not just like in an apartment, there were logistics with things where I just didn't feel comfortable with the close quarters and stuff having a home birth the first time. And now I was so excited, like, yes, I finally get to have that home birth. And so checking out midwives and stuff, it was a very happy, exciting time.
Oh, that's beautiful. So that's really exciting because you had this beautiful, unmedicated, out of hospital birth. And now this time it's like, yes, we're going to bring it home. So
Oh.
you've got that in mind from the beginning. Tell us more about how that pregnancy unfolded and, just even from the very beginning.
Yeah, so in the beginning, everything felt pretty normal, just now navigating life with this little toddler and being pregnant at the same time. I wish I've heard people even on the podcast being like, I crave just like the healthiest food or homemade things. Not been my experience both times in the first trimester. Like, I just want things as, like, if I don't make it, then it tastes delicious to me, basically.
I get that.
And yeah, and so, navigating through what to eat was my big thing in the first trimester. And I think feeling like a little bit more nauseous this time around, more just those classic first trimester things, but it was pretty typical, like no complaints.
Mm, wow. And then as you progressed, what was it like?
Yeah. And so then we got to find a midwife team that we really enjoyed. And so, started going to a few appointments there once it was time for me to start going and, ask all the questions and be excited about second baby. And then in like pretty much right as I hit the second trimester, I started feeling way more nauseous. Like it had receded that little bit of first trimester nausea, and then it felt like it was just coming back with a vengeance. And I was thinking, like, this is so weird. Like, why is this happening in the second trimester? Like, that was my experience before of feeling, so much better and pretty normal. And stuff. And then I got pregnant around January. And so around May, we took a trip, my husband James and we went to Charleston. And like, I had been trying to drink more water and was talking to the midwives about, this or that I could do for the nausea. Chugged a bunch of water when I woke up and then randomly threw up. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Like, it must have been because I just drank so much water. Like, my body didn't like that. And then felt very, very low energy at that point. But we were on a trip and, still like there was plenty of distractions and mustered enough energy to still have a great time. And as we were getting home and stuff, it happened a couple more times like that with the water, being like, okay, I need to like, figure out what's going on with my body. It's like what I need to eat or spread out that water intake. Like apparently I can't just chug. Um, like that. And then there was sort of these layers of these red flags of a couple weeks after that. It started being like randomly I would throw up after eating, not just in, that experience of before breakfast and stuff. And there was a lot going on at the time. My husband's dad had come out for a visit and was like building a chicken coop with my husband, and they were like super engaged in doing that for a couple of weeks. So I was like responsible, for taking care of James, like making sure that they're fed because they were so busy. And from that, like I was wiped. Like I basically all I could do was like get a frozen pizza ready for everybody and then go lie down. And as we were talking with the midwives about it, it still seemed like, oh, you're just having a rough pregnancy, like it took a wrong turn. Um, Kind of, and still just suggestions of like natural remedies or things that I could be doing. And it progressed to the point of I was at a midwifery appointment and it was still kind of on that level. And a couple of days later, I called them back because it had progressed again to where I was throwing up all of the time now. And like I was called them crying and being like, I don't think that I can do this. Like I need some help and stuff. And so they suggest, like, we talked and planned it out for me to see a doctor and maybe get some Zofran at that point to help with the vomiting. And they said like we'll check in a few days and stuff. And then from that point, so all of May it started, like occasionally like, oh, that was weird, and towards the end of it, like just throwing up way more often. And then at the beginning of June, though, there was 2 weeks where Caitlin, it felt like I was in active labor for 2 weeks straight. Just the intensity and how much I had to like gather myself of just like being there, like putting all of my energy into just being and making it through. But this was so much worse because it wasn't, there was no end in sight. Like it didn't have the purpose of birth at that point. It was just very intense where I could not, it got to the point where I couldn't move without vomiting. There was very few things that I could eat. I can't eat them to this day, but I basically was surviving off of steak and strawberry smoothies and like salami sandwiches and stuff. And this was a very scary time for us because we thought like, what are we going to do? I was laying in bed, or like Brandon had to help me to the bathroom because I just felt so sick, or I was laying on the couch. And we still had to take care of James. And my husband was able to work from home for those couple weeks, but we called family and asked them, like, could you come out? Like, I was 20 weeks at this point. So we thought, how are we going to do this for the rest of pregnancy? Like how, like I can't be there to take care of my son. And I had a friend, which made all of this more confusing, a dear friend who had a very gnarly, very similar pregnancy and felt so much better after she gave birth. But she came to see me and pray over me and like bring us food and things that we need. And just like me laying there, she saw of being like, I know exactly how that feels, which was like such a sweet thing in the moment, but added to the confusion because it still felt like, wow, I'm just having this really gnarly pregnancy. And yeah, but my friend did say, where she was like, the one thing that I like, so regret afterwards was being like, you mentioned that you couldn't like sit up comfortably, and then it progressed to the point where I couldn't walk straight. And she said, like, that didn't sound right to me, of like you not being able to sit up, because I was so hunched over, like it hurt to pick my head up. And this progressed so quickly, and we were in just like the depths of it, of trying to like feed ourselves, and Brandon helping me to the bathroom and helping me, to get a bucket, like to throw up, and being with our son and stuff, that like we didn't even, I feel like, pick our eyes up enough to see like, wait a second, what is going on here? And we kept on holding out because it was like a few more days until I had that doctor's appointment. And my friend, like, I already was taking some Zofran, but it wasn't helping. But we were thinking like, maybe the doctor will have something else and stuff. And we hadn't heard from the midwives at that point and stuff. So we were just holding out, of being like, it's the weekend, like nobody can do anything anyways. And like, we're just, hopefully that appointment with the doctor is going to help us. And so I didn't want to go to the ER because of that feedback, of being like, wow, this is just a really hard pregnancy, from the midwives or people that we were talking to, of thinking like, what are they going to do? Like, we're going to pay so much money for me to get fluids and more Zofran. Like, I'm already taking that. So that was our hesitation there. And then, praise the Lord, our neighbor is a retired chiropractor, and I was having a lot of neck pain. And so, like, and he still has his license and practices. And we went over there, where I was thinking, like, maybe a correction, or there's something really off in my neck. He corrected me. We went back the next day, and just from laying in bed all day, getting in the car to go across the street and walking into his house, I threw up. And he said his exact words. It's so funny. He's like, I don't know like what you guys are thinking here, but unless you're Christian scientists, like I would go to the doctor. And we thought like, okay, well we're not. And so like we'll take that advice, and it seems like it's this point that we need to see what's going on, like if there's something else here, or for me to get some assistance and some rest and stuff. And like, praise the Lord for the timing, my mom had flown in that night. And so when all this was happening and we were having this conversation with our neighbor, she was had taken Jane's, and they had gone to the store. And so we called, told her, and we were like, well, they're out, like we might as well go right now, and packed up a few things, and didn't think we were going to be there for long, and went to the ER.
Oh boy. So this progressed like, I mean, obviously, it started kind of small, but like really in the whole scheme of things, this progressed like really quickly. Gosh, that had to have been really just so stressful and so scary.
Yeah, it was very scary, and like it felt like we were just in the throes of
Mm.
it. Like I didn't really have any sense about me of what was going on. Like it just felt like I was hanging on at that point. And then that day and night in the ER was absolutely awful. I had been sleeping a lot, going to bed very early and taking long naps, and just had no energy. And that night we wound up staying up, I think, just waiting to be seen, and passed back and forth into this and that room, and waiting for a CT scan and such. Like it was 4, I think, in the morning and stuff. And I thought, like, why are we here? Like at home, at least I could have eaten something. All we had was apple juice at that point. They didn't have any food for us, and I could have gone to bed. Like, I feel so much worse being here. Like, I want to go home. And we were waiting, and almost at the point of being able, next in line to have a CT scan. And I thought, okay, I'm just gonna hold on until then too. And they had given me something at that point, because they were thinking like, oh, this is just neck pain or nausea or whatever, and that was making me feel so much worse. And then a nurse afterward told me like, yeah, then I saw you go up to walk to the bathroom, and like staggering, you couldn't walk straight. And I thought, that's not just nausea in pregnancy. And so got a CT scan, and the results came back, a doctor came in. I was so sick at this point that I had a towel wrapped like over my head, and Brandon, like, we were able to joke even though it was just this gnarly um night. And like I told him I felt like one of those like rescue animals in a TV show where they're like, transporting them and like have something over their head so they don't freak out. um so that was a bright spot of just us being there together, but it was, yeah, it was extremely hard. And then it got harder where the doctor came in and told me that they had found something on the CT scan and that it looked like it was a brain tumor.
Mm. Wow. Oh my goodness. Like how did that news land?
Yeah. Um very heavy. I was at this point where I already felt like I was dying with the intensity of everything that had been going on the past couple of weeks. And so it kind of was just brought up to my face and it made sense. Like, I don't think I took it as such a shock as everybody who, told me later said that they took it. It felt like, of course, that's what was going on. Like, of course, I had a brain tumor. Like, it had to be something like that just because, of what I knew that I was experiencing in my body, and that it wasn't normal and that it was serious. And so it felt like odd relief in in some way of knowing that there was something severe, and then just laying there in the dark feeling worse than I can describe with that towel over my head, like I'm not even seeing, who this is that's telling me this. It was a moment of just like staring me in the face of my life, and we had been going through such a hard time and like moving and all the upheaval. And I felt like for that past year there had been this cloud over my life, like emotionally, physically, now realizing, and spiritually. And like I just was at this place of not knowing what was going to happen next. They didn't know. They said that. And like in the dark, praying there and asking the Lord like for a second chance. Like, it was just weighing so heavy on my heart. Like, I want to be there. I want to be Brandon's husband. Like, I want to be there to be James's mom and to dance with him at his wedding and to meet Theo, my baby. And I asked the Lord for mercy in that. Like, I was at peace in knowing like what could happen, but also just so desperately wanted to be there and to be there for everybody, and to see the rest of my life unfold. And at this point, this was very late in the night. They transferred me to the neuro ICU. That was very uncomfortable.
Mm.
um, and then I went in the next morning for emergency brain surgery.
Wow. Wow. So you're finding this out in the middle of the night and it's the next morning. Like there is no time to gather your thoughts about this. Although, I mean, I know with the state that you were in, it probably would have been very hard to gather your thoughts anyway because
Mhm.
you're in such a state of just constant distress. But what, oh my goodness. Like how did you take that on? You get into neuro ICU. It's the next morning. Did you, I mean, I'm guessing Brandon was there. Did you get to see anybody else?
No, not at that point. Yeah, Brandon was there with me, and then, by by himself as his wife gets wheeled off like for brain surgery, and, you know, pregnant. And we had some dear friends where their husbands came and prayed with Brandon, and just were with him while I was in surgery. And yeah, like you said, the state that I was in, I was kind of just all only able to take it as it came, and wasn't, fully present. But I do remember them wheeling me down and them taking Theo's heartbeat before I went in. And even as out of it as I was, like I could just gather from the context clues and what they were saying, like they were going to take it again when I came out, and they didn't know, like they weren't monitoring him while I was in surgery. It was just like trusting and seeing what happened. And so that was sort of my last thought before having brain surgery.
And remind me, how many weeks were you at this point when the
I,
surgery actually happened?
I was 22.
22. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. At the
Wow.
point, which like it was in this funny middle part where like I had to be in this different ward when I went into the ER, but he wasn't old enough yet with, you know, whatever the laws are for the being in the ICU. So it was just at this point of like, we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, so how did that surgery unfold? What happened next?
Yeah. So I woke up from surgery feeling so much better. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yes, praise the Lord. I like just it felt like this huge burden had been lifted, and obviously I had just had major brain surgery.
Yes.
So there was all of that to recover from, but I felt so like just so much better. I didn't have any of those symptoms that I was experiencing. There was a brain tumor. It was blocking my spinal fluid, which was why, and like where in my like motor control area, which is why I couldn't walk straight, why I was feeling so nauseous, was that blocking of spinal fluid. So I felt amazing and was like joking with Brandon and the nurse wheeling me up where they were like struggling to get me in the elevator or something, and I was like, come on guys, it's not brain surgery. So that was my claim to fame. Waking up from brain surgery. Having a brain surgery joke. So yeah, that was like elation basically. Those next days of getting back into my room and recovering and just being so grateful to be alive, that Theo was alive. There was this point of like us, yeah, not knowing, and I just remember like hearing his heartbeat and that he was okay. Like it was just the best thing in the world. I was just utterly grateful.
Mhm. Wow. Oh my goodness. So, okay, brain surgery. What was recovery like? What was pregnancy like after you've had this massive upheaval?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. There was a big period of just recovery still in the ICU. I spent the next 10 days there. I had, like, they were monitoring to make sure that my body could cycle my spinal fluid still after the surgery. So that's why I was there. And there was like a tube, and it was this whole thing of like not knowing, you know, if that was going to be okay to close or if I would have a shunt for the rest of my life. And like, yeah, so there was a big level of processing, and those days felt very long. And we got to see our son. He came in twice, and like we had two sets of grandparents staying and helping us out there, and that was just like the best and so sad at the same time, because it just felt like we were living in this alternate reality at that point. And yeah, like it was just, it was still felt so early on in my pregnancy too, and so much to process at that point. Like I popped while we were there, and you could really see the baby while we were in the hospital, and we didn't know at that point why I had had a brain tumor either. And so there was still all this wrestling and processing of like if I was going to have a cancer diagnosis after this, and like so grateful to be alive and wrestling with like what will life look like after this point. And I had been exposed to a lot of different medicines that, you know, it's typically not safe for them to give a pregnant mom, but were life saving at that point, or for surgery and afterwards and stuff. So we didn't know what life was going to look like for Theo after he was born as well. And so, yeah, that was like a time of great rejoicing while we were in the hospital, even with all these unknowns, and like just seeing God's kindness and his hand in everything. Like I have never been so low and so needy, but seeing him show up in such a great way with so much incredible encouragement from the people around us, like him doing so much in my heart and in speaking to me, and Brandon and my marriage, like we had time. As odd as it sounds, like it of just being just us a lot of the time, besides when we had visitors. And so we had great conversations and just time to like relax and recoup and color and eat together and just be together. The Lord gave me Psalm 40 over my life and the whole situation. Brandon actually was reading it to me every night before I would go to sleep. Like there was scripture that I was listening to, and there was a verse out of it that I just clung to. And part of it says, He will put a new song in my mouth. Many will see in fear and put their trust in the Lord. And it just felt like that was a season that was happening. Like I had this new song to sing of His goodness and like this new life, and like was telling everybody about it. I was just on fire for that story and what he had done, and so grateful. And we had so much help from family and friends during that time. And yeah, then I got to come home, and that felt like I was I would tell Brandon, like, our wedding, the day that James was born, and this day that I get out of the hospital, those are the best days of all time in my life. Like, I got a call from the neurosurgeon as we were leaving. Like, it felt like such a relief to be there and be out of the hospital and be able to put my own clothes on. And a few days before that, I had gone outside for the first time, and just like the gratitude of being able to feel like I kick my shoes off and feel the grass. It was so good. Anyway, got a call from the neurosurgeon as we were driving back home that the pathology had come back, and it was not cancerous, the tumor. So, like, praise the Lord, that felt so amazing. And then later we got to come home, and like our family had just, cleaned our house for us and brought in flowers and made everything so sweet. And my mother-in-law had written all of this scripture that was up on the walls during the time that I was in our hospital. It was pasted all over our room, and we just got to like walk through our house with these fresh eyes of like how good it was. And Brandon said, like, I think that coming like home to heaven will feel like this. And I said, like, yes, absolutely. That'll feel better because it'll be permanent, but this is so good. And then we got to reunite with James after that. And the grandparents came and dropped him off. And that was just the sweetest thing of getting to hug and see my little boy again. And he loved being chased at that point. So wanted to be chased around and around our house. And we said, like, "Look, James, let's go outside." And he got this look on his face, and he said, "Mama gonna throw up." And it was so sad. And like, I think that was kind of the first key of being like, this is so sweet and so good, but there is also like so much to recover from in that. And that was kind of my experience for the rest of it, of like that night. The past few nights in the hospital, I could not sleep, and like I just didn't have a name for what it was, of what I was experiencing, of like why I couldn't sleep, and the sounds and just all that was going on in my mind and my body at that point. But like, it was trauma and just having so much to recover from, and that was like unexpected for me at that point. And so yeah, coming home, like, it wasn't all starry and rosy like I was expecting. In some ways it was still good, but there was a lot to work through.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that makes so much sense, that balance of beauty, but also, wait a minute, like, whoa, 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 I just went through something wild,
Mm-hmm.
and having to come to terms with that, almost like, your mind having to catch up with what has just happened to your body through all of these weeks. And then, especially at the end here with this massive surgery, but just like, yeah, kind of like catching up, kind of like when there's a precipitous labor, a very fast labor. And sometimes the mind takes some time to catch up with the body of like, wait, what just happened? That makes me think of the same thing of your body being like, hold on a second. What did we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt very much like that. And it felt very much like there was this long road of pregnancy still, and so much to do, and so many Unknowns. Yeah, and so that was just like a summer of processing, like you said, of wait, what just happened? Yeah, and growing my baby and being grateful and working through the hard and just like more pregnancy symptoms coming up and more things that were uncomfortable. Like I had pubic symphysis, which is where like your pubic bone is separating, and like swollen, achy feet and heartburn and all of these not glamorous things. And I forgot to mention that in the hospital, I had a team of the high risk OB team coming in to see me and, monitoring the baby and checking in on how I was doing. And it was sort of like this. There wasn't even a question in it. It was like, oh, okay, you were trying to do a home birth. Like, you're obviously with us now. And so my care got transferred to high risk OBs. Like at that point, again, like I said, we had no idea what was going on. So it was very warranted. But that was part of the summer in processing as well of now being under OB care and having to go to those appointments and feeling like this dream of having a home birth was lost.
Mm, gosh. Okay, so that's happening. How did that progress?
Yeah, so going to the OB was hard. They were very lovely and very accommodating of being like, we know that this wasn't your like plan A, but plan B can still be really beautiful. And we're here like for you to work as a team and give you what you're desiring, which I so appreciated. Like that was like the best place to land basically after all that had been going on of it feeling supportive. But as time went on and doing these appointments and this or that I was so accustomed to not doing or not wanting to do, and such of just like all of the testing and all that goes on and just such a different model of care, it was really wearing on me. I found it really exhausting, and there was a lot that I was planning on not having to deal with that was coming up again, and advocating for myself and asking this or that question or saying no to this or that test and stuff that I found it rather exhausting. It was such a different model of care, even though they were so great, where I often had to sit for an hour before my appointment time and such, and then yeah, just go round and round in this battle. And it felt so clinical too, like of having to use the little wipes and doing a urine test every time, and then wanting to take blood so often for this or that and such, and like being treated like I was something broken is kind of what came across at this point. Like we had found out that while the tumor wasn't cancerous, I had a genetic mutation that had caused this and made tumors like highly more likely. So just like the like that was sort of added to it of being like, well, you have this thing, so this is what we're doing. And the most interesting part, I think, of that OB experience was they really did not want me to push. One of the OBs was very adamant about that, like very like right off the bat of being like, I don't think that that's safe, of like the cranial pressure or whatever, and like we need to talk about doing an epidural and forceps or a vacuum and stuff. And at this point, like it felt like this was just sort of taking what was in front of me, and like it didn't, I wasn't in the place of questioning that at the time, and was just really wanting still to have a natural birth, or like a vaginal birth if it was possible. Because in the hospital, one of the neurosurgeons mentioned like kind of offhandedly like, oh yeah, like sedated C-section for sure. So I went from being like, okay, at least I don't have to do that, that's great. And then as time progressed, and one of the other OBs was a little bit more lenient with what I was requesting and such, and so he asked the neurosurgeon for me like what his thoughts were on that. And he had this awesome reply where he was like, she's had a baby before. It'll have been 3 months since her surgery by the time that he's born. Like she has so much time to heal. And like, no, that's not a thing. I don't understand why that would, like why pushing would affect that. So he cleared me for having a vaginal birth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That That is so exciting. That had to be such a relief.
It felt like such a blessing, especially coming from that place, that I was at previously in my life of being like terrified of birth and the hospital. Like I did not want any of those interventions if it wasn't necessary. So to hear that it wasn't was so exciting. And then as time went on, I started like accepting the fact of that hospital birth. I actually reached out to our Bradley method instructor from my first birth because Bradley is very focused on like husband coaching natural birth in a hospital setting. So I thought that that would be helpful to kind of like, arm ourselves for all of these hospital things that we weren't expecting that we would have to deal with. And so, yeah, going on this journey of like preparing and advocating for myself, taking a tour of the hospital, writing down, taking notes of all of these different things that I just didn't want to experience there. Like I had on my birth plan, like I will not watch the "Don't Shake Your Baby" video after he's been born and stuff. Like I cannot like imagine just the stress that would bring on for me. And so I had this like long, detailed, like as nice as possible natural birth plan that I brought in to the OBs. And that more lenient one I had the appointment with, and he looked it over and he said, like, yeah, all of this should be fine because you're low risk. His one thing was he really wanted me to have an IV, like, no matter what. And for me, like, even though I've gotten used to the whole birth thing, I'm so squeamish and just had all those experiences of, having IVs in for many days and stuff. And so it wasn't just like IV, no IV. Like, it just made my skin crawl to think of it at that point. But like, that was kind of his stipulation. Like, all of this is fine, but you need to have an IV in. And so I said, okay. And then around that point, I had, picked up and still been listening to your podcast so much and like still wanted to be in that mindset of birth and being open to that experience, even if it was going to look different than what I had expected. And I listened to your third birth story with your son and your free birth, and this was like late in the summer at this point, and it just planted like this beautiful seed in me where I just like resonated with your story and what you shared so much, and just like felt so drawn in to that experience of what you guys chose for your family and what was right for you. And I just had like this deep sense of like being so unsettled about what was happening and like this knowing that it wasn't right for me. And I kind of sat in that for a while, still going to my appointments and just feeling like this isn't right, even with all of this that I've done. And like we had gotten a doula at that point for like somebody to be there to help Brandon so like he could, be there for me, and like somebody hopefully to help with the advocacy part of things of just like us wanting to leave early and them not liking that and those sorts of things. And I just felt like it's still not right. And then, but it still kind of felt like in this place of helplessness of like, but this is just what we have to do. And like at that point, from like what, like different aspects we didn't want even to be under the care of the midwives that we were seeing previously. So it felt stuck in a way, like there's nowhere to go but here. And then I think I listened to that to your birth story a couple more times. It was probably like three in total, and just kept coming back to it and like sitting in that space of being like, I think that there is something else for us here. And then like it clicked for me of bringing those two aspects together of wait a second, my neurosurgeon cleared me to have a vaginal birth. And when I brought my birth plan into the OB, he said, oh yes, this should be fine because you're low risk. That was the whole point of me having a hospital birth, was because this whole crazy thing had happened, and that put me under a category of being high risk. But those two things together of like, no, you're actually fine, and we just didn't know what was happening at the time, and like your neurosurgeon says that it's going to be okay, especially by then that you've had a few months to heal and have had a baby before. Like it just clicked for me in this way where I was like, wait, then why are we here? Like, why are we doing this? And was sharing and processing all of this with my husband. And again, interesting, just like with my first birth, it came down to that financial aspect for us, where obviously we had met our deductible at this point with brain surgery. So that would have been fully covered for us to be in the hospital. But for midwifery care, this was very late. It took me a long time to process all of this. I was like 36 weeks, somewhere around there, when all of this was coming up. Like, we would have to make that financial sacrifice and not have had, all of the pregnancy care up until that point. And so we were talking, praying about it, going back and forth, and we had these sweet, dear friends from back home who Brandon was sharing this dilemma with. And like, just without hesitation, his friend was like, "We'll pay for it." And we're like, "What? Are you crazy?" And they're like, "Yeah," like they have had home births with their kids, and like love that whole process, and like could see our hearts, and like just that is what we wanted and what was right for us. And we're like, "Yeah, like we want to give that to you guys. Like, if you're able to find a midwife, like whatever it is, like we're gonna help you out and cover it." And we were like, "That is amazing." Like,
I'm
what?
like gonna cry.
I know, it was such a blessing. And the thing is, like, it was such a gift in the timing and just their generous hearts in that, because it changed our hearts, like, in, to really evaluate where we were and what we had been through and what we felt like was right for us, of being like, if they care that much and are that invested in like what we get to choose as our birth experience, and how our baby is coming into the world, like it felt like so much more at that point, of like this celebration of life and stuff. Like, why, like, we felt convicted, like we should have that for ourselves, like we should be making that choice for our family. And so we wound up saying thank you from the bottom of our hearts. But we wound up finding with somebody and covering it, but we told them, like, you gave us the biggest gift, because it absolutely, like, I am sure if they hadn't done that we would have just teeter-tottered and wound up being like still in that state of feeling helpless and like, oh, this is just what we have to do this time and stuff. Like, it was, I don't know any other word, but like empowering for them to give that to us.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's so beautiful. So okay, we've figured out like we do want this and we're going to make it work financially. But then the other big question is who? Like are we going to be able to find a midwife? So what was it like finding a midwife?
Yes. So I, hopped around all over the internet and collected, like, luckily there's a lot of home birth midwives in the area. And so, like, everybody that I could find, and we were, making all of these calls, and I felt crazy calling around. And, and it started, the no's started coming back. Of some of them were like so sweet and considerate, of like, I wish that we could, but we're just booked up. Some of them were a little bit more like personal of saying no. And I just felt like I am going to be the crazy girl in the birthing community, of like the crazy girl calling around who had brain surgery at the end of her pregnancy trying to do a home birth. And I started getting really discouraged because quite a few no's had come back. And on that list, there was only, I think, like 3 more midwives to do. And like we wound up, we did get a yes back, but it was somebody like it didn't feel right at all. So that felt like another loss, of being like, oh, we could have done this birth center, but it just doesn't feel right at all for different reasons. And we had a few numbers left to call, and I just felt so discouraged. I told Brandon, like, I don't even want to. I feel like I can't hear one more no and stuff, and went back and forth on that. And finally he called them for me, which I so appreciated. And he felt kind of funny about it. Like, I don't really know what to say, or like, all of the whys, or like how to answer these different questions, like about your heart, of why you want to do this, or medically. It was just like, I feel very unequipped for this, but he did that for me, which I so appreciated. And so everyone, for various reasons, was no. We thought that was everyone, and just had to settle with being like, okay, like, I guess we have to do the hospital, but we're going to make it the absolute best that we can. And our doula was so wonderful and supportive, and we felt like we were going into this as a team, and just like kind of having peace of accepting, like, okay, like we tried and that was a great try and this is just what's best and we'll just have to move forward in that. We didn't realize that we hadn't heard back from one midwife, the very last one of all the midwives in the area that we had called. And like, I got to talk to her on the phone, and it was just like this sweet, wonderful connection. I felt so comfortable. It felt like it didn't even matter that we hadn't had all of that previous prenatal care, because I just felt like I knew her and trusted her, and she was so accommodating and like so realistic of looking at what actually happened and like wanting to educate herself and like actually, very much taking that into balance, but also it felt like so much trusting me and my body, and like the timing had just worked out so great for her where she had an opening and she said yes.
Wow. Whoa. Just incredible. Incredible. Okay, so you get a yes. You have this all figured out. What were these last few weeks of pregnancy like? Kind of, you'd been a little bit in scramble mode, but now you've got your care provider, you've got your home birth. What were those last few weeks like? And then let's jump into that birth story.
Okay, fantastic. Oh man. So there was also the hurricane going on at this point, that so we like didn't have power and we're processing all of that. It was crazy. Our midwife came over and we met for the first time the day I turned 39 weeks. So that was fun and very sweet of her to be so accommodating. And yeah, just like went over all the things, planning a home birth, just, lots of getting ready, all of the home birth supplies. Like we hadn't been through that part before, but I really enjoyed it because it felt like, yay, we're actually doing this, so it didn't feel like very stressful of a scramble in some ways. And then James was born, my first son, at 40 weeks and 6 days. I was still pregnant at that point with Theo, and I got contractions that night. So he was born at 41 weeks exactly. So that extra day was like a mind game. But his birth, like in all of this, I'll say too, like in the hospital, I was telling my friend like all of my worries of like, we don't know how his health is going to be because of all of this and all of these things. And she interrupted me and she said, no, Chloe, I am telling you, like I just know it and sense it. Like Theo is with Jesus asleep in the boat. Like the storm is raging around and he's like that. Like he's just resting there, totally at peace. And I so appreciated that and needed to hear that and clung on to that for the rest of pregnancy. And that has been so true in birth and all throughout Theo's life. Like he is at peace. And it is such a gift because there has been a storm raging around us for his whole pregnancy and life. So birth just felt very easeful and peaceful in a way. Like I got contractions starting, that night when I went to bed. No, I woke up with them around 1 a.m. and I like had that temptation, like get out of bed, like be excited, text the midwives and the doula. And I thought, no, I know better. Like I know that they would just want me to go back to sleep. And so I like those must have been, very early contractions, and they were like I was able to sleep through them. I would get up to use the bathroom. I could tell like it was dark, but could just tell that I was like losing my mucus plug and stuff. And every time like was able to go back to sleep. So I had a great night's rest, which was wonderful. Woke up, like we had grandparents take James, which was what I wanted. Like I was right for us at the time, felt like I could focus, like let them know, the midwife and doula early on in the morning, and then kind of just labored. And my contractions were very short, getting closer together, but still very short, like a minute less or under. And she suggested the mile circuit, which like I said, I thought would have been helpful the first time. And that felt like things really kicked up after there. I fell asleep and I forget, what is that, like the second position? So that was great too. Like,
Perfect.
yeah, it felt very easeful, like I said. And so contractions started getting closer together. At that point, Brandon had like a slow day at work and was able to work from home, and we thought like, oh, you know, for paternity leave and stuff, that'll be great, like if you work up until the last point if you're able to. And that's something that I would definitely change if we are blessed with having another, of like making sure that day of labor is very intentional and that I communicate what I want and need, because it felt a little distracted by that, just like not able to be helped, of him going back and forth with the computer and being there with me and stuff. And at the time, like we were making that choice like logistically, but I definitely would like take the time of just us being present, because I think that's what made my first birth like so special to me, is that we were really doing it together. And so it felt a little bit more scattered this time. And I also was not having back labor. And as strange as it sounds, like didn't really know what to do with myself because of that, because my first labor was so long and we got into such a rhythm of like, you know, the counter pressure and changing positions and stuff. Like it just felt like we like got that down. You know, and so this time it felt fast to me, even though it was all night, and Theo wound up being born at 6:30 p.m., but felt so much faster comparatively. So, and like of not having that anchor of like, when I'm having a contraction, I need counter pressure. It just felt like I was like, I don't really know what to do. Like I did a lot of bouncing on the ball and like walking around, and like, yeah, it just felt more like just a little bit more chaotic, not quite as intentional or as much like of that like listening and deep knowing and resting and stuff. And I think part of that was just choices that we made of like being intentional with it and stuff. So yeah, like I said, kind of just trying to figure out what to do with myself. And I like handle contractions that weren't like alleviated by or assisted by counter pressure and stuff. And the day kind of just wore on like that. And another thing that I've noticed about this birth is we waited way too long for what I'm comfortable with, of calling the midwives and doula, because I was in that mindset of like, this is like birth feels like this is going to take forever. It feels eternal. You know, and so things were, yeah, like that little aspect again of like not being quite as in touch as I would have liked, of like not really knowing what point I was at. And for Brandon too, like missing it a little bit, of being like, I thought that I saw it, of like when I became more vocal and seemed more intense and like I wasn't interacting as much, but like just this a little bit of like uncertainty, which is so funny because we like made this choice and it was so certain of being like, yes, this is what is right. And then I feel like we had a little bit of trouble like catching up to that and bracing it and stuff. So yeah, we called the doula finally as later in the day, and she suggested that I get in the shower, which I really found so helpful in my first birth. Like I was in and out of the shower all day, but this time did not like it, was not fun. And I started having back labor while I was in the shower, and I was like, what, like this is such a bummer, why is this happening now? And it just felt really intense. I felt very cold, which looking back was probably transition, did not realize. Felt very cold even though I was in the hot water and stuff. And she was like, do you want me to come? And even in that we were like I guess. And we were very used to doing this for a very long time by ourselves, and like, you know, kind of braving labor by ourselves too, which I think was a point in it of just like not really seeing that this was going differently this time. And so thankfully we did tell her to come, and she was there like 45 minutes later. This is late in the afternoon, maybe like 5 around then. Like I was like, you know, asking her like, should we call the midwife and stuff? And she was saying like, well, your contractions are still pretty short. Like I'm gonna watch a few of them and we're just gonna wait and see. And they were getting, it was the same thing where they were getting closer together at this point, maybe like 4 minutes or something, but still very short, like a minute or under. And I was like, felt like I was playing mind games that whole time of being like, why does this feel so intense, but these are so short? And yeah, just a little bit caught up of like not that like deep stillness and like being present and with the Lord in this birth. Like I was kind of like worried about logistics of like, who had my son and how he was doing. I was telling the doula this, and like she was so sweet and reassuring me. And I remember her like using this calm voice, and I really loved physical touch. Like at that point, so she and Brandon were petting me and helping give me counter pressure and stuff. And she was saying like, just think about like 10 tiny little fingers and 10 tiny little toes. Like that's all I want you to focus on and be thinking about at this point. And I just felt like this wash of like, yes, okay, you're right at that point. And then kind of it surfacing again of being like, like this a little bit of like just I don't know, this loss of control where like she was Brandon and her were trying to like get a TENS unit on me, and like I was being really particular about where I wanted it and just feeling a little bit panicky. And like she suggested that we try a different position, and I really didn't want to move at that point. But we were waiting, and the contractions felt like they were coming on top of each other at that point. And like she was waiting for me, to have a moment where I could to get into this other position. And I felt this downward pressure. And I told her, that feels like pushing. And she said, oh, okay, 1 second. Stepped out to call the midwife, who had just been waiting this whole time, this whole day for us to be ready. And us like silly little ducks were not communicating that, not knowing that we were very much ready. Nobody knew. It was so funny. Not even me, until I felt that sensation of where we actually were. The doula told me afterwards of like, yeah, I remember like you saying at some point, like, I don't think I can do this. And she was thinking like, she's a second time mom. And like, I forget what she said, but was just thinking like, you can definitely do this, like, and stuff. And like, that was because of where I was at in labor.
Oh boy.
So our sweet
Hindsight.
yes,
Hindsight's 2020, baby.
absolutely. So our sweet midwife, who we were so looking forward to having, was there for 8 minutes before Theo was born.
Well, that's 8
Mm-hmm.
minutes that she was
Mm-hmm.
there. That's
Yes.
great.
So
She made it.
she made it. I forget how fast she said she was driving. I don't want to know. Yes, midwife's assistant did not make it. So our sweet doula was in that role of putting in, the dates and times and whatever for charting. And yeah, so it was my midwife was joking with me. She was like, yeah, you probably would have had him sooner if like you didn't refuse to move, because I never wound up in that different position that the doula was suggesting. I just laid there side lying and was like, I am waiting until she comes.
Yep.
Yeah, which I did not tear this time, which was lovely. And she also said maybe that was an aspect of that, like you were able to get nice and stretched by the
Yeah.
waiting, which works.
We'll take it. We will
Yep.
take it.
And so, yeah, she came into the room. Obviously, that all felt like it was happening very fast, because it was. And I think I still had like my shirt on at this point, and like felt kind of, this like relief once she was there, and this sense of like, I don't want to be lying here anymore. And like wanted to take my shirt off, got into all fours on the bed, and was like getting kind of like those fun noises again. And like, yeah, just deeply, like I forget what I was saying, but like I remember the midwife saying like, Chloe, don't let it get on top of you, like you're okay. And that was another thing that like was very grounding for me, of like taking a second. I was able to calm down and be like, okay, I got this. And then yeah, like started embracing pushing at that point. And then yeah, she also told me like Theo was out, like about to hear at his cheeks, and I started saying, where is he? And so yeah, I like being on my hands and knees. Like I was always open to that, but it wasn't my favorite, honestly. Like I felt like a lot more aware of what was happening the first time on the birthing stool. And yeah, like it just like I don't know, that was interesting. Yeah, I was so eager to see him at that point. And then, that like ring of fire, and then just like him feeling Theo come out all the way. And like that was another like funny, awkward thing. Maybe that was the part of why I didn't like hands and knees, of being like, what do I do? How do I grab him? Like, how do I sit down? Where is he? Where's the cord? All of those things. But you know, after that moment of like again finally getting to meet him, that is my favorite part, getting to meet my babies, and I was just on cloud nine at this point. He had a little bit like we had sort of like a starry light on, and so we're not sure if my water broke before the midwife got there, and so that was another moment of like, okay, for everybody else, Brandon and the doula looking at each other like, wow, this is happening. But when the water broke, we're not sure because of the lighting, like if there was meconium in it. The midwife thinks that there was, because Theo, when he was born, was having a little bit of a hard time breathing and stuff, and had some snuffly nose, and like she was very calm and telling me to rub his back, and I forget exactly why. She was saying like she was hesitant to assist him right away, of like not wanting to push it up further, something like that. But so that was like more of a few tense minutes for everybody else, of like making sure that he was good, and for me, like I was aware of that and like trying to help him, but was also like so overjoyed in
Mm.
meeting him, and like yeah, maybe like not picking up as much of that concern. And then yeah, that was just the best feeling ever, of getting to hold my sweet baby that we had already been through so much together. We named him Theo while we were in the hospital, because that night of finding out that I had the tumor, like I found like throughout that night I had been thinking of him as Theodore, and like we hadn't decided yet, and told Brandon about it, being like, I would feel weird calling him anything else, like from all that we've already been through together. And Brandon looked it up and he was like, I'll tell you what, like his name is Theodore, because it means, like he looked it up and it means gift of God. And that felt so appropriate, especially like for meeting him, and just the joy of that moment of like, this is such a sweet gift.
Wow. Wow, wow. And just I don't know, that just that picture that your midwife, gave you that image, I think, of, Theo was in the boat asleep, the storm's going on, but he's at peace and he's not worried and he knows it's okay. And just what a tether to this experience. And I know that there are points in it where you felt very untethered, but at the same time, there were these strong focal points, these moments of clarity and just regrounding, to what all was going on. And I'm curious to hear, with all of this, when we look at this whole thing together, Chloe, what do you feel like, what's the big picture? What did you learn, and what would you share with the listeners in regards to your story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, looking over all of it, like I can't help but seeing like the Lord's hand in all of it, sustaining me and leading me through. And like you said, like points of being very untethered and points that were very hard, but just knowing deeply his withness, of him being with me, and that assurance, like in the deepest darkness of not knowing if me and my baby were going to live or die, like there was just this bedrock of peace and trusting. Like I can clearly say with assurance, like it felt like so significant and like so much more to me than in the hospital, of being able to say and know God is good. And just that sense of being so assured of that, like I feel like I can handle anything and all that motherhood has thrown at me, even on the days that I feel like I don't want to, honestly. And that has been everything what I needed. And I'm so grateful to the Lord and his kindness of leading me through it and delivering me. And so that is my biggest and most important takeaway, is his goodness and what is written all over my story, and that I would want to share. And then like a subline of that is just like my gratefulness in being able to experience it and how much it has transformed me of doing it, and like I am so grateful to you, Caitlin, and the podcast and all of the amazing moms who have come on and shared, because it really, really transformed my motherhood journey. Like, not that our like anyone's journey is any less valuable or anything by not, having a natural birth experience. Like, that's not it at all. They're like, but just I feel like I am so grateful for what I have gotten to experience, and I just never would have wanted to miss out on that. And it has launched me into motherhood with just like such a sense of security and confidence of like just being there. Like, it feels like I have experienced it and embraced it in all of the wildness that was, and like I have drawn so much strength from that, and it's really changed a core aspect of who I was. Like, going from somebody not long before getting pregnant, I passed out at a birth story that somebody was telling me, like it was a part of life that I just couldn't handle before, and to now like see and have experienced so much beauty and sacredness and like appreciation for it, and to have done it, and like the gift of the lives that I get to live my life with my children. Like, it's such a gift. So thank you for being a part of that, and for sharing, because it really has been so impactful to me.
Wow. Chloe, that means so much, especially coming from someone who just shared this like heart-wrenching, incredible, like powerful story. I'm so grateful to hear that you've been blessed by these. And I'm also so grateful because I know that in telling this, you are blessing thousands of other mothers. That's just amazing. And this story in particular, one that is filled with so many unexpected aspects. And yet, your takeaways being so positive and enriching, and how this hard experience was turned into something beautiful and life altering. It's incredible. It's just so beautiful. So thank you for blessing me and blessing all of these other women and families with your story. It has been an absolute honor. Thank you so much for coming on the Happy Home Birth podcast.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thanks for listening.
Time for our educational tidbit. Okay, in this episode, we heard about a mother who felt the urge to push seemingly unexpectedly. The signs of transition had been missed. So let's talk about transition. What is it? Why is it called that? Now, here's what's happening during transition. For the first part of your labor, your body has been in opening mode. Your cervix is dilating more and more as the muscles of your uterus pull upwards. Now, here at the end, as the last of the cervix is being pulled away and you are becoming completely dilated, your body has to do a big gear shift. Those muscles are now going to begin pushing down with massive force. This period of time, known as transition, is where the hormones are a shiftin' to get the job done. It is a very pivotal point in labor, and many mothers experience it as a sense of, I can't do this anymore. I can't go any further. I have hit the wall. It can be accompanied with sweats, shivers, and nausea, all signs of an adrenaline rush. And all of this as your body begins to calibrate to its new task, pushing out your baby. Now, there is so much more to transition and understanding the stages of labor and what you can do to feel confident going into this experience. This is what we discuss inside of Happy Home Birth Academy. So if you're ready to prepare deeply for your home birth, click the link in the show notes and get started today. All right, now let's head into this week's episode roundup. Are you blown away, or are you... Well, never mind. There's no other option than to be completely blown away with Chloe's story. As we head into this week's episode roundup, I've got a few points that I want to share. If something is going on in your pregnancy that you feel unsure of, even if your care provider thinks it's a variation of normal, follow your intuition. Get a second opinion. Chloe's scenario was so hard because her friend had experienced a very difficult pregnancy, And her midwife thought that this was simply a tough pregnancy. So even though Chloe felt that she was really quite nearly dying each day, she didn't know what to do. It wasn't until someone else with medical background laid eyes on her and said, "Hey, this doesn't seem right," that she and Brandon sought more medical attention. I am just so grateful that they were able to receive the care that they needed. Next, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. Late in her pregnancy, when Chloe felt that home birth was the right option for her, she could have just given up after the first midwife said no. She recalls thinking, "Oh, great, I'm going to be known as that crazy girl who had brain surgery." But honestly, who cares? She had the sense that home birth was the right call, and she went after it. And wow, didn't that pay off? And finally, let's end here. This event that Chloe experienced, it wasn't good. It's not good that it happened, and there's no delight in the suffering that she experienced. But what's amazing is the ability for something so ungood to be used for such extraordinary good. For Chloe to come to the other side and say, "Through this, I learned just how good God is." You can't make that up. Chloe's story is a story of hope and a blessing to all who hear it. Okay, my friends, that's all I've got for you for today. I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Are you looking to extend the home birth support, encouragement, and education? Join us in our Facebook group, Happy Home Birth Podcast Community, and check us out on Instagram at Happy Home Birth Podcast.